Hi there and welcome back. Today I'm going to be showing you two fun projects that will involve maples, washers and a tile. Now this is not a new technique and perhaps you've seen it on social media. In the first of the two projects I'm going to be showing you how to cut out a tile, drill holes into it and then put Japanese maples, insert them through the holes. That's going to be the first project. The second project is going to be to use washers to take the place of the tile and to obviously just insert individual trees into that. So let's get started. For the first technique, you're going to need a tile. Power tool that you're going to need is an angle grinder. This is going to enable you to cut the tile into the size pieces that you need. You're going to have a ceramic cutting disc fitted to the angle grinder. You can't just use any disc, it'll obviously need to be for ceramics. You're also going to need a marker, a diamond core drill bit, which is used for drilling holes in tiles. For the core bit to work, you're of course going to need a drill, and you need to operate these bits at a very low speed. So you should have a variable control speed, a suitable container, development container, and then of course a bunch of Japanese maples of a suitable diameter. For the second project, you are going to need a washer. Now you can get these in different sizes. These are called fender washers. A fender washer is slightly different to a normal washer in the sense that it has a very broad metal surface, and this is going to be important, and I'll explain to you later. You can buy it in various materials. These are stainless steel. This is going to be under the ground, wet for an indefinite period of time, 2-3 years, and so you don't want something rusting and obviously breaking or corroding away in the soil. So use preferably stainless steel. You'll also need some containers that are suitable for developing the first few years of this tree as a bonsai. Then you'll need some maples, and you obviously want the maple to be, the trunk of the maple to be as close to the inner diameter of the fender washer as possible. First thing that I need to do is to cut my tiles into the shapes that I'm going to need. So I'm going to start off with that. This is a terracotta type of fired tile. You can really use any tile. In fact, you can use any material really that's not going to perish too quickly, because it's going to be under the ground for probably 2 to 3 years, and you also don't want it to leach any chemicals or anything into the soil that could be dangerous for the plant itself. So you can use wood, preferably something that is waterproof, or any kind of board. But just it needs to be able to stand up to being under the ground and constantly moist, of course, for 2 or 3 years before you're going to remove it. What you want to do is you want to make sure that the tile that you're going to use is going to allow enough space around the tile for the roots to run off, and obviously also to get water into the growing medium. This is the tile that I've cut already for this container, and as you can see, there's probably 2 centimeters or so on all sides for water to go into the growing medium, and for roots to flow around the edges. You can use any shape, any appropriate shape. I've used jugs to make a line around the tile to mark the size. And make sure that you're wearing ear protection. It is fairly loud, and most definitely eye protection. You certainly don't want a shard of tile to shoot up and into your eyes. Make sure to vary your spacing between, or the distance between, each of the holes, and this will give you a more interesting planting. You may also want to use more, here's 3, but you might want to, especially if you're using cuttings, you might want to use 4 or 5 holes just in case 1 or more of the plants don't make it. but that's entirely up to you. The size of the drill bit that you're going to use needs to allow for a couple of millimeters, maybe a 1 or 2 millimeters, a larger hole than is what is required for the plant itself. I'm using it with water. This is the best way of doing it. So now I've cut the tiles into the shapes and I've drilled the holes out, and so they're ready. I'm now going to prepare the plant material for planting. The original article that appeared in Bonsai Today, on which these projects are based, actually uses Japanese maple cuttings. You can use the cuttings of any deciduous species. If you are going to be using cuttings for this project, then it would be best to take those cuttings in late spring, once the new spring leaves have hardened off. That's of course the best time to take cuttings. I believe you get better results using older material, because if you're going to grow them from cuttings, not all of the cuttings are going to strike. And of course then those areas you'll have to go back and replace those trees with new trees, and therefore you'd be disturbing the planting. But in this case, these are 3 and 4 year old Japanese maples that have been grown from seed, and so they already have some stored energy, and they've obviously already formed roots. And so the risk is much lower that one of them is going to die. You can use any deciduous material for this technique. Going to remove them from their containers and reduce the root balls. Don't use your favorite scissors for doing this work. Working in the soil, you should ideally have a pair of scissors, especially for the purpose. Otherwise, you know, when you're working in the root zone, there's always going to be little stones and things that can blunten the scissors very easily. So I'm just removing this mat of roots, and once that's done, I'm going to take them outside and wash off all of the old soil. With my 5 Japanese maples now with the soil reduced, I'm going to take them outside and wash them off with a jet of water. I'm just going to cut the roots a little bit cleaner and just reduce them in general. You don't need to worry about the way that you're cutting it for aesthetic reasons, because you're not going to be using or keeping any of these roots eventually, and I will show you why in a moment. Now this is where it gets particularly fun. What you're now going to do is insert carefully the tree through the hole. You want the trees to be as close to the diameter of the hole as possible. And this is because what's going to happen is now the tree is going to grow, and it's going, when you allow branches to develop, the trunk is obviously going to thicken. But now, of course, there is movement of hormones, plant hormones, up and down the tree, sugars and starches moving around, and obviously the trunk is going to fatten up. But when it fattens up to the size of the hole, and because this is a rigid material, it cannot go any, the only place that it can go is to start swelling out. So what you're going to find happening now is you're going to find a swelling of the trunk as it gets to the tile, and eventually it'll form roots because of an accumulation of plant hormones in this particular area. And ultimately what you're then going to do is you're going to cut off these roots underneath the tile. The difference between using this technique and doing, say, for instance, a layering, is that the plant is going to swell due to the restriction of the tile in this area. So it's going to form a flare, and then obviously the roots will eventually form will add to that flare as they then travel and escape off the side of the tile. Now what you're going to then do is keep this buried for 2 to 3 years, and you're only eventually going to remove the tile when the roots that have formed above the tile have started to fuse or have fused. And essentially what we're going towards creating here is a clump style. So what I'm going to do is just continue to insert these trees, and you want to insert them in a way that just like any group planting, the trees always grow towards the outside where the sun is going to be, so they won't be growing into the interior. I'm doing this, the best time to do this on material that I'm using, which is seedling or young plant material, not cuttings, is when the tree is just starting to bud out in spring. So it's now early spring, and that's going to be the best time to use this technique if you're using this type of material. Just be careful, very careful, not to break off the buds as you're passing the plant material through the holes. So then we end up having something like this. So as I've already mentioned, what's going to happen now is that over the next 2 or 3 years, the plant, the trees are going to fatten up at just above the tile. Eventually, due to the concentration of hormones, there will be roots that come out of that swelling. Now, those roots should hopefully flow in all different areas, but of course you can expose it maybe after year 2 and check on the progress, or year 3, and maybe just rearrange the roots so that they do overlap one another. And then ultimately those roots would then fuse, and it's at that stage that you can remove the tile with the trees, and then using a knob cutter or root cutter perhaps at first, and then a knob cutter, remove these roots at the bottom, and then you'll be left with the roots that have grown at the top of the tile, and then you can just plant it again. So just once again, the objective in this first technique is to achieve a clump style. Moving ahead, I'm just going to prepare the container, and I've got some drainage mesh and some wire, some aluminium wire, and I'm just going to use this to cover the drainage hole so that my media doesn't fall through. Make sure that you get the wire bent up to the same diameter as the drainage hole so that the mesh can't move, basically. Okay, so the container is now ready, and I'm going to put some growing media in. I'm using growing media that is suitable for deciduous species, which is 2 parts akadama, 1 part pumice and 1 part lava, with a little bit of agricultural carbon mixed into it. But whatever you have access to, so you want something that's going to be quite free draining but quite water retentive, depending on the species that you're using. But with Japanese maples, they do like a little bit of water. So I'm going to fill up this container until I get to this just below this top rim. Most containers have this, but if yours doesn't, because you might be using something completely different, what you want to do is you need to allow a little bit of vertical height to put soil above the tile, because of course those roots will need moisture. It can't be drying out there continuously. So you need to allow for a certain amount of height. I would say probably in the region of, say, 4 centimeters should be enough, that you'd want to be covering the surface of the tile with. Because I'm using plants with roots on it already, one needs to be very careful about getting growing media underneath the tile, because it's very difficult or impossible to chopstick growing medium in here. So what I would suggest you do is that you make sure that you make a very good mound of soil in the middle of the container, to a point as much as you can. And then when you push down, hopefully much of that media will then fall into the gaps between the plants. And now we can just wiggle this down. It's important that for clump style or for any group planting, as I mentioned, you're always going to have your plant material growing to the outside of the planting. So you need to just rearrange, make adjustments to the angles of the trunks so that they can grow towards the outside. So just make the adjustments as you need to. And of course, just again comment on, you need to vary the angles. You don't want trees intersecting other trees when viewed from various angles. So everything should be, but you don't want everything to be flowing at the same angle either. So you need a variety, and that's what makes things interesting. I'm now happy with the angles of the trees, and the next step will be to just add a little bit more medium, and then I'm going to chopstick in from the side as best as I can. Now you can also understand the importance of this gap between the tile and the side walls of the container, because this allows you some room to get in around the side with the chopstick as well. I'm just going to fill up with more media, and as I said, you obviously need to put enough media above the tile so that when roots do start growing, that they don't dry out, because of course the roots are not going to develop in that space, or if they start, they can dry out, and of course they will die. And now I'm going to demonstrate the second technique to you, which is really just a variation of the first technique. That one with the tile is great because you can plant a clump style, but what you can also, if you don't have enough material, or if you prefer, you can do a single planting using the same sort of the technique of a restriction, and thereby creating roots above the restriction. And so what I'm going to do now is I've got 2 more maples, Japanese maples as well, and they're just about to start budding, so it's the perfect time to do this work on them now. And I've got 2 different sizes of washers. The only difference really is the size of the hole on the inside of the washer. If the hole of the washer is very close to the size of the trunk, or the girth of the trunk of the tree, it's going to start swelling above the washer just that much sooner. So you don't want to get a washer with a huge hole in the middle with a thin little plant. Again, you can use older material like I am, which is 3-4 year old Japanese maples that have been grown from seed. Alternatively, you can again use cuttings, but then you'd use much smaller washers. I'm just going to prepare the container, cover the hole with drainage mesh. Okay, with my containers now prepared, I'm going to remove the maples from their containers, and then just remove or reduce the root ball, and then wash it outside. So with the root balls reduced on my 2 Japanese maples, I'm now going to take them outside and again just wash them off thoroughly, get rid of all of this organic soil, and we'll move to the next step. Finish cleaning the root ball. Now I'm just going to clean up these roots a little bit more. And again, it doesn't really matter what these roots look like, you just want to reduce them a little bit, and so that they fit into the container. Now you carefully want to insert the tree into the washer and bring that down as far as it can go. Obviously, this is where it's important that the gap between the trunk and the hole in the washer is as close as possible, so that it doesn't take too long before it starts to swell against the washer. I'm going to put some growing medium into the container. This is going to be a lot easier because you can actually get a chopstick in around here much easier than on the plate. So you want to try as best as you can to fill any cavities. You're going to need enough soil above the washer to so that area above the washer stays moist at all times. Otherwise, any new roots that do emerge there are going to die. And that's the first one completed. So just working on the second one here now. Just remember to plant your tree at an interesting angle as well. I have now completed the two projects that I said I would demonstrate to you. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you're going to try the same, applying the same technique. So just to go over again what it is that we want to achieve. The tile or the washer is going to cause a restriction on the growth of the trunk as it fattens up, and it's going to create a nice trunk flare just above the tile or the restriction tile, board, whatever washer that you're using, and eventually it will issue new roots at that point from the swelling. Those roots will then grow across the tile or the washer or the board and down into the soil. If you're doing the clump style approach, the first project that I showed you, then you need to wait until those roots start to fuse, which could take anywhere from three years or so, depending on the species that you're using and how strong the material is. If you're using cuttings or if you're using young trees like I did. And at that point you can then lift it out of the ground, and then you would remove the bottom roots, and then you would continue growing the tree, the fused tree or the individual trees with the roots that developed above the restriction. So I hope you've enjoyed this fun video and try out these techniques. Unfortunately, I don't have any examples to show you of more mature plantings that I've done this way. Unfortunately, they're all sold. So I'm basically starting my own now again along with you, but I'll be sure to share the progress with you as they develop. If you haven't done so yet, please do like and subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell, and then you'll be notified when I upload the next video, which is usually every Friday afternoon, and then you'll be notified. Till next Friday, take care and goodbye.